Roman, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Hey Rob, thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. I'm always super appreciative of people coming on the podcast and speaking in English when English is not your first language. So thank you very much. I do really appreciate it, especially taking time on your holiday as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. Yeah. So I will first, apologize for all the grammatical, all the syntax, I would say error and mistake that I will do in the next hour. But that's really an important thing for non-Anglo-Saxon people to are able, to write articles, English article, and also to speak. So we work also on that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, you mentioned the article that you wrote for Sportsmith. So this is a bit of a follow-up to that article, which went down really well, was super popular on foot and ankle training and testing. And like we said before I hit record, this is an area that people are very interested in, mainly because there's a lot been spoken about it, but research probably isn't, well, you know more than me, but research isn't there to back up some of these claims and the protocols and things that people are doing in the field. So that's why we're here today. So, but before we get into that, would you mind just giving us a brief intro to you?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, my name is Romain Tourillon. So I always say that I have four big hats in my professional career. So the first hat is my clinical hat, as I'm a sport physiotherapist, so working in La Tour Hospital in Geneva, in Switzerland, where I lead the foot ankle services in the physiotherapy department. I would say in my clinical practice, I'm not just looking after a patient with lower limb injury. So it could be after post-operative surgery, like an anterior cruciate ligament, or it could be much more chronic issue like chronic ankle instability or chronic tendinopathy. My second hat is my research hat, as I'm currently involved in a PhD. So under the supervision of JB Morin, so Pascal Edouard and François Fouché. And my PhD thesis, so the title is the role and the function of the human foot muscle strength in explosive tasks. So I would say in kinetics explosive task, and we will talking about later. My third hat is a consultant and a teacher hat, as I give courses all around the country, so France and Switzerland, to physiotherapists in relation to foot ankle rehabilitation, so injury to sport performance. And in the next year, I will also give courses in Australia and Italy and also in Belgium. So it will be, I would say, my first courses in English. So it will be, I hope great for sure to travel the world to share knowledge and to give courses, but a little bit, or I can say that, it could be something, difficult for non-Anglo-Saxon to do that. And my final art is a representative art, as I'm also an active member of the International Angle Consortium. So it's a scientific organization. So with the aim of promoting the dissemination of research-informed knowledge in relation to the ankle. So it's really an honor because I'm the youngest person of this group, and I work with amazing researcher and a human person. So it's really great. So I'm in this group since 2020.
Very interesting. Lots of hats, which makes me even more appreciative of you taking the time to write such an extensive article on the foot and ankle. So no, thank you very much. So let's dive in. So the most basic of questions, which probably will yield a more in-depth answer, but why do we need to train the foot? What contribution does it actually have to sports performance?
Oh yeah, so that's a great question. I would say just to have a big clarification. So the first clarification of this podcast and of the article is not to say that the foot is the most important, region of the lower limb, and you have just to focus on it to perform. But the idea of this article is really to have this holistic approach, as I always say. So to consider the lower limb from the hip, just from the hip to through the toes. And through the toes, I will say through the toes and the ankle, it's the foot. And we know that so the foot has an important role in the lower limb function, and that we have to focus on. You have to also be aware of what he does and what he doesn't. So that's what the science also say. So for me, it's really important to consider this in the lower limb function, so to consider the foot from an assessment point of view and also for the training point of view. So working on the foot after an hamstring injury, it could be for me really important. It could be an issue, but also working your hip after plantar heel pain, your hip extensor, for example, it's also could be an issue. So it's really to have the consider of the holistic approach, and I just want to have a comprehensive view of the foot in this lower limb. So yeah, I think that's, I would say, the big clarification of the of the beginning of this talk. And so to answer to your question, so yeah, I think there are too many reports in relation to the foot. The first one is that must be the less assess and the less trained region of the lower limb chain. So that's a fact, as you know, because we don't know exactly what he does and what he doesn't. Also, it's the second report. Also, it's always funny that always people combine the foot and ankle. I always listen to work on your foot ankle stiffness, work on your foot ankle strength, and you combine these two joints. And for me, to combine these, you have to measure error. The first one, scientifically, we know that the ankle plantar flexor, so the plantar flexion with the calf, is an important aspect in explosive tasks. So like we know this in cutting, we know this in acceleration, the work of Sachi, of Pandey, so the Australian biomechanical research group show that. But they show this with, I will say, a basic anatomical aspect of the foot, which is rigid. So it's just saying that the foot and ankle, it's a rigid part that doesn't deform. And we know that it's not really the reality, but we know also scientifically it's pretty challenging to perform explosive tasks with have a great biomechanical modeling of the foot. So I will say that the ankle plantar flexor is pretty important, but the transfer of all that your ankle can produce and all that your calf can produce, soleus and gastrocnemius, is only as important of your foot and all the structure within the foot to transfer this thought and this production. And in relation to that, you have two big anatomical region that are pretty important in the foot. Is the first one is the medial arch, so the midfoot. So we know that the foot play a big role in the energy conservation in the lower limb. So it has really a spring, what we call a spring-like function that store and release mechanical energy in the stance phase. And we know that it's not just passive. So historically, we believe that it was just the plantar fascia and the ligament within the foot that does this, I would say, function. And we know since the work of Luke Kelly, which is, I would say, the best researcher in relation to understand the role of the human foot muscle. And we know that the intrinsic foot muscle play a role also in the spring-like function. So it's an active spring-like function. So it's pretty interesting, I would say, in steady state locomotion. So like running or at max speed. So knowing that the foot have an importance in the spring-like. We also know that the foot play a big role in the energy absorption and generation. So during non-steady state locomotions are like drop landing, drop jumping, like hopping or like in acceleration. And approximately we can say that the foot can dissipate in generation between 10 and 18% of the energy in relation to the acceleration or deceleration of the center of mass. So I think it's pretty, for a small part of the lower limb, I believe that it's pretty important. It's pretty huge. And we know also that which structure does the majority of this job. We know that it's the extrinsic foot muscle, which are located externally to the foot, but at that they have the insertion inside the foot that are the greatest energetic contributor. And what about the intrinsic foot muscle? So the intrinsic foot muscle, which are the muscle that insert inside the foot, we know that this muscle play a greatest role, I would say, for giving a good leverage for the ankle. And we know that when you can't actively produce force when the intrinsic, so it can't actively produce force, we know that you have an impaired an impaired of your ankle function, so of your power and your force production. So we know this in running, but also in hopping and in drop landing and drop jumping, for example. So that was interesting to say that maybe the importance of the intrinsic, it's really to stiffen the forefoot and to give a good leverage for the ankle, for the calf. And for the extrinsic foot muscle, they have play a major role of an energetic contribution, to the foot. So that's why, as the forefoot and the midfoot is in exposit as the only part of the body that touch the ground, that after in the assessment and the training you have to focus on. So I will say, to synthesize, foot ankle complex is one, the calf, the ankle plantar flexor. It's the midfoot region, it's the forefoot region, and we will talk about this later. Also, the role of the first ray when considering the forefoot. So yeah, I think that's what we know about the foot.
I was going to ask you a bit of a pre-question, which maybe should have come first, and it was a basic anatomy lesson of the foot. But I think you've covered that. Is there anything else you'd want to clarify around the anatomy?
Yeah, I would say that it's really a very complex structure, because you have many articulation. You have 16 to 70 articulation. You have many bones, many muscle. But yeah, it's interestingly, it's really the part of the body that has evolved the most since the human evolution. So pacing from grasping tree, to bipedalism. Yeah, so human bipedalism. So we know that now we have not an adducted big toe. We know that we have an important human arch, medial longitudinal arch, that play this role of store and release mechanical energy. And we have also a big calcaneus, so a big bone, heel bone, in comparison to monkey and chimpanzee and so on. So yeah, anatomically, I will say that you can divide it in three regions: the rear foot, the midfoot, and the forefoot. And you can divide it, and we know that from muscle point of view, you have these two big groups. And in this article, I will say just talk about the intrinsic foot muscle and the extrinsic foot muscle, which play a role into flexion. So yeah, we know that you have also the tibialis, so posterior, interior, the fibraris also that are extrinsic. But yeah, in this article and this postcard, we will talk much about intrinsic foot muscle and extrinsic two flexors.
Perfect. Right. When anyone says foot strengthening, or you see it on social media, my first thought, or certainly what I've seen, is bands, like super, well, what I would consider, and probably you would consider as well, pretty low level stuff. Can you give us a bit of an overview of the kind of current or traditional foot strengthening protocols? Am I right in thinking that it's traditionally super low level with bands and things?
So yeah, you're totally right on this aspect, because when you look at social media and also the research, as you say, yeah, I saw many times so sitting position, TheraBand, or I can to posture to yoga exercise, and for me it's maybe not it's about or it's a good exercise. It's for me forgetting what we know about the foot, and that's why I believe that it's a light approach, because when you know what the huge amount of force that the foot has to deal with, and in comparison you look at what you want to strengthen your foot and your foot muscle, yeah, I say okay, there is some maybe we can be better, or we can work on that. And that's why I will say reading a lot of study for sure and research around the biomechanical aspect and the neurophysiological aspect around the foot. I raise four problems that I put inside the article. But for me, the problem number one is maybe a neurophysiological problem, because we know that the intrinsic foot muscle, for example, and the abductor hallucis have really a small motor unit in comparison to his physiological cross-sectional area. In comparison, the abductor pollicis for the end is the reverse. So you have many motor units in comparison to his physiological cross-sectional area. So my muscle, my foot, my hands muscle are much more, I'm much more prone to have to precisely have forced gradation, to have two coordination. And in courses, I always say that. So this is me playing piano, so my hands, foot muscle are able to do that. So neurophysiologically, in contrast to the to our neurophysiological properties. So really to have to are able to do that, to do this, and so on. And that's why I say, but we want hands instead of feet? And in reverse, it's a foot of very famous athletes that collapse to the ground, that have this huge amount of force. And from a neurological property, we know that the foot is really has to deal with huge force, and can produce a huge amount of force, but not precisely have precise
Yeah, sorry.
a precise uh, rise of the forces. So that's why I think that all the two yoga or two posture exercise or maybe Theraban is not neurophysiologically appropriated for the foot, and that in consideration to the foot, it has to be stiff, but the tooth has to produce amount of force to when the foot and you have the dorsiflexion, the foot have to resist to the vertical growing reaction or the horizontal or the mediolateral, and so he has to produce a huge amount of force around that. So that's the problem number one. And so the problem number two is, as I told you, it's a load bearing structure, and we know that considering this loading effect, we know that we have no electrical activity around in the intrinsic foot muscle when you are just in standing position. So, and we know that since 70 years ago. But it's funny to know that, I will say. And the activity of the foot muscle start to increase pacing from a single leg stance. So it's funny to see that we know that, but I don't see any exercise, could be a social media, but also in research, to perform some kind of foot or two exercise and whatever you want to call that in with weight bearing, with body overloading, what I call body overloading. For me, it's for sure an issue for that, because I always say to some physiotherapists and strength and conditioning that told me that my athletes struggle, to perform my exercise. I said to okay, so just do it in standing position first, also, but also some body overload, and you will see that you start to increase your activation of your foot muscle without performing any contraction. So just the effect of load, what we call in the foot, which is important, the load fine tuning. So they have really this capacity to have this versatility, so to increase their activity in relation to the load or to also to the task. And for me, that's also an important aspect. So just do this body overloading. You will see that maybe, and I have many experience that it increase their capacity to perform the exercise. But as you probably think, it was try to do this and to do this with the toe. So this is problem number two. And the problem number three, it's also we have a neural activation deficit around this intrinsic foot muscle. We know that even in healthy people or healthy athletes, they don't have the capacity to fully activate their intrinsic foot muscle. And that's why I will say that we are the big innovation maybe in what we are doing now. It's also to use the electrical stimulation and to be the first research team to use this modality to the foot, because if you come back to the neurophysiological property, we know that you have I would say a small number of motor units, and putting just two electrodes just under the arch for targeting I would say the three biggest intrinsic foot muscle from a volume point of view, but also for the function point of view, have really permitting from a clinical point of view to have really good effect and good result about symptom, about pain, but also about function, so plantar plexure distribution during running, but also on force plate assessment about the stiffness, and also the capacity after session of electrical stimulation to have a better, I would say, neural drive around this muscle. So that's problem number three. And the last problem, it's what I call the the 3 set of reps of 10 reps, so 3 set of 10 reps is universal, and for sure the foot does not escape of that. And that's a big issue for me, because when you look at all the programmation of the exercise in the literature, it's always, you have no motion of volume or intensity. You don't know how you keep your contraction. You don't know if it's maximal or not, and we don't have a calculation of anything about that. And that's what I said, that the foot suffer from generic protocol, and that's why also we try to. I would say we, but I try also to use what Natera in this isometric strengthening principle. I use also this big principle to work on this periodization of how I create also my exercise and also after my protocol. But to conclude, for all these 4, I would say, problem in the current foot strengthening protocol, I work, so 2 or 3 months ago, with a very famous professional tennis player who is struggling with foot injury. And the first time that I saw him, I said to him, okay, so what did you do with your previous strength and conditioning or physio? And he said to me, so he gave me, this kind of exercise of, I have to elevate my hallux, I have to flex my toes. And I said, I know this kind of exercise. And did you do it, or what was the effect on that? And he said to me, so the first thing he said to me, that he didn't feel anything. So he said, I didn't know if it will work, but I didn't feel any tension, muscular tension, like he said to me, like you when you do a squat, you feel the burn in your quadriceps or in your glutes. And he said to me, I didn't feel anything. And he said, I very struggled to do this. So I was very disappointed of this kind of exercise. So I stopped them, and so I stopped to train my foot, because I didn't believe in that. So, and I said to him, okay, so I say, I know what you've done, and you will be happy that we will do something else. For sure, we will do something else. It's not a question of saying, oh, it's not your hallux that you have to elevate, it's your second toe. It's a totally different approach, and we start. So we start the rehab with this story, but it was funny that it just raised my 4 problem, just saying these 2 sentences. So it was cool and great.
Excellent. Well, I think that's an incredible overview of anatomy, of how it links to sports performance, and kind of current protocols that are out there. So let's dive into the assessment side of things, and we'll start with the forefoot. When it comes to in the lab, and most listeners of the Pacey Performance Podcast will think about what goes on in the gym and in the physio room. What assessments have we got at our disposal to assess the forefoot?
So as I said before, it's maybe the less assess and the less trained. It's the less assess also because it's, I don't say difficult, but I will say that we don't know, you have many joints, so which joint can you assess in the foot? And for sure, we believe now that the forefoot and the strength flexion around the MTP joint is an issue, and is a really good assessment to assess the intrinsic foot muscle and, as I told you, the extrinsic to flexor in relation to the importance also of the MTP joint in the stance phase. But yeah, we don't have any gold standard currently. So you don't have an isokinetic dynamometer for the foot. And so that's why we created in the lab. So I will talk about our lab setting. In the lab, an ergometer where we put the foot in an ergometer with the ankle in neutral position, and we have a dorsiflex position and on the MTP joint, and we evaluate the strength flexion around the MTP joint, and we have a 3D force sensor. What is great about that is that we can have the pushing effect of the toes, but also, the gripping effect, as we also have the horizontal force axis. And this ergometer, so I have this idea with during the lockdown, during the pandemic with my father. So I started to create it in the wood, and after I came in the lab and said to JB Morin, okay, so this is what I think could be an interesting tool to evaluate the strength of the foot and the forefoot. And after we developed it with an industry, because the wood, if you know, the wood was not stiff enough, and we want also to have some rate of force development, so on. And after we validate this, but yeah, it's a great lab setting, because the first aim of my PhD is, okay, you want to speak about human foot muscle strength. So first one is the ability of you have to create something that is valid to have a good assessment on the foot strength. But yeah, as as a clinician and a researcher, I know that it's great for lab setting. But so, well, if I have my athlete now, for what can I do? Why can I say that he has a good foot strength or a good strength? And so that's why I have one clinical setting. It's with the NL dynamometer, but it was great to create this clinical setting, knowing the potential compensation and knowing what we're struggling in the lab to have a valid, to have a reproducible with less measurement error with our lab setting. And so that's why I won't say it's not the gold standard of the clinical setting, as if you look at also on social media, different practitioners have other setting around the foot strength measurement. But my advice will be to have a fixation really of the ankle and also on the MTP joint. So a fixation, I would say a belt could be very important on that. And also, if you want to have, I would say, a good foot strength assessment around the intrinsic and the extrinsic two flexor, you have to be in your ankle near neutral position or in neutral position. And you have to have a little bit or dorsiflexion also, because you know that you are in the force length optimization of this muscle. But if you want to have much more intrinsic contribution, you just have to be in your MTP joint in neutral position also, but your ankle in really large ankle plantar flexion, sorry, to have the reduction of the contribution of the intrinsic. So that will be my advice. And the tool, I will say an NL dynamometer. And also I start to work with the force frame from Val to have also a setting around that, but knowing these two advice, so fixation of the ankle, a fixation of the MTP joint, to avoid, I would say, the compensation with the calf uh, um, that could create some force around the forefoot, but just ilial raise. This is the big compensation. So yeah. And what about the good value of strength? I will say with the clinical setting that I put in the article, I would say that um, in the first ray assessment, it's 2.79 Newton per kilos. And for the Lesothos, it's 2.2 Newton per kilo in fully rehabilitate athletes. That's this because the first rate be should be greater and should have a greater force than the Lesotho. So a ratio of 1.2, 1.3.
Perfect. So that's assessment, forefoot assessment
Yeah.
side of things. So how can we then take that on? We've done the assessment. We've benchmarked against those numbers that you've just mentioned there, and we want to strengthen that area.
Yep.
What protocols do you have to put in place to strengthen the forefoot and move that needle forward?
So as you mentioned, so you have your assessment. So that it's a cool thing. So you can say, okay, the force is not enough around the first ray and around the Lesothos in comparison to the other foot. So, or in comparison to what I have in experience from a good normative value. Or so if you have, I would say, all the tools together, I will start with my forefoot strength exercise. And I would say my main exercise on that is the forefoot strengthening in single leg or double leg stance position. And I will, after in this exercise, I will take into account all the previous problem that I mentioned before. So I will use a maximal pushing action. So it's a PIMA for what we know about the isometric strengthening. So it's a pushing isometric maximal action. So pushing strength flexion around the MTP joint. So you have a dorsiflexion of the toes, as I told you, to increase the force length optimization. So to have a better capacity to produce forces. So that's the first thing. You have a body overloading, and as I told in my programmation, that if I use much more an hypertrophy strength program, we know that after rehab, after foot ankle injury, or when you leave out your cast, you have hypertrophy of the calf. That what we always seen in many athletes, but we forget also that you also have an atrophy of the intrinsic foot muscle, but we don't see it visually, I would say. So I use this kind of program, I would say much more post-operative, but also when you have, I would say, a chronic issue sometime. And in consideration to hypertrophy, I use it's the volume of isometric contraction. It's the total volume. Sorry. So I'm between a pushing action between 7 and 10 seconds. I have some set and rep, so between 6 and 7 rep, and between 4 and 6 set. So to have between 140 and 222 seconds of total volume of pushing action. And I decrease also in for the hypertrophy, the body overloading. So that's depend if you are in single leg stance, if you want to work just one leg, or in double leg stand if you want to work both of your limb. But the body overloading, it's, I would say, between 30% of your body weight to could be 150 body weight. And the programmation, it's, I would say, always increase the body overloading, decrease the volume, so the total isometric second contraction, and increase my, what I call my body forward leaning. So when you are in this position, it's, to have a little bit forward leaning, because you will have a anteriorization of the center of mass and sort of pressure under the foot, and you increase also the activity just inside the foot. So that's also a great progression. So yeah, increase the body weight, decrease the volume, and increase the forwarding. That, until my week, this will be my my clear progression around that. And when you are maximal force, you have much more body overloading, and you have a contraction between 3 and 5 seconds, and you have a total volume of 60 to 80 seconds. So that's for the forefoot. And if, for example, you have just a first ray, a deficit, so you could have a good Lesotho strength, but for example, your Lesotho has greater force than your first ray. It's an issue, because we know that the first ray is, I will say, not the most important ray or part of the forefoot, but we know that it's really two different parts of the forefoot, because the first ray has his own muscle, and we know that the volume dedicated to the first ray is greater than the foot muscle dedicated to the Lesotho. And in consideration to that, we know that you should be, and you have to have a greater first ray strength. And it's funny, because I usually, I would say, lucky to have a plantar pressure assessment. So to have a great instrumented treadmill here in Geneva, and I saw many times the correlation between first rate strength deficit and, I will say, a non-optimal plantar pressure distribution. So pushing with your second toes, or pushing with your lateral border of the foot, which is what we know that it's impair also your ankle function. And so that taking to that this into account. So if you have first rate deficit, and analytically, you can have, for a functional point of view, really also a difficulty to have a good distribution, plantar pressure distribution and force distribution, just in your stance phase. And for that, it's the first thing. The first ray is really a strong part of the forefoot. So yeah, if we come back to Terabon, I don't believe that, putting a Terabon on your hallux and do it in sitting position. So I really like also the isometric way to strengthen your first ray. I really like also that if you have also feedback, it could be a plantar pressure platform. It could be also an LD nanometer with an iPad or with your phone to see your force strength curve. So I use to kind of exercise. So isometric pushing action against a wall or against a dynamometer to have the feedback in standing position. And I use also a leg curl, I would say modified leg curl exercise, where you have to elevate your toe, your first ray. but we have an overloading and a loading on your just at the bottom of your knee, and dealing with this huge amount of load. So the leg curl could you can have a great I would say a great sensation around your first ray, around your medial arch, for sure. And that's, yeah, these two kind of exercise that I will perform analytically, I will say. So yeah, so the leg curl exercise, if you don't have machine yet, you can put heavy bag, and it's like it's the same position I would say that the solid strength, for example, but just the change is that you want to elevate a little bit your heel, but just by flexing your first leg. Yeah.